Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Career Journey Podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Avila. Today's episode, we have Dr. Dawn DiPeri, and she has been teaching, writing, doing design, graphic design. She develops courses for online, face-to-face. She does a wide variety of things. She's opened her own businesses. She's very successful in a lot of different things, and this conversation was super eye-opening for me personally. She mentioned an analogy of how in her early career, she was doing a lot of different things and that it was exciting and safe for her because it was like investing in stocks where you have diversified portfolio. You're trying to put as many eggs in as many baskets as possible to make sure that something kind of hits. And it was amazing to hear her say that because that's exactly what I am doing as an early career professional now with this podcast, with teaching, with creating a new online community, with writing a book, all of these different things that I'm kind of throwing out into the universe to hope at least one of them sticks and is successful. And so it was really reassuring to have somebody kind of put an analogy to something I've been trying without realizing. And so if you're in this state where you're attempting to kind of masquerade and do everything, I feel that in society today, it feels like we have to do everything in order to survive. We have to have more than one revenue stream. We have to have side hustles. We have to have all these things. And so it was really great talking to Dawn in this conversation about how she managed to do that and how she managed to set herself up for not only business success, but psychological success at the same time. So please enjoy Dr. Dawn DiPeri. Hey everyone, welcome to the Career Journey Podcast, where we explore exciting careers and how to get them from the people who've lived it. I'm your host, Dr. Brittany Avila. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy. All right. Well, hi, Dawn. Welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being on today.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for having me.
So I usually just start with from the beginning, really. Did you have any idea of what you wanted to be as a child growing up?
Um, yes. So I guess everybody has ideas as a kid of the different type of career paths they want, and I think that changes so often for most people. I'm sure that you found that. I guess my first idea of what I wanted to be was an actress. Not very practical, but I thought that would be fun because I like to act. I knew I wanted to do something creative. I was sure with that. So
Mhm.
something in art or something acting.
Awesome. And then how did that transition? Did you do any drama classes in high school or?
Yeah, so I took like private acting lessons for fun. I was in the plays. I ended up going to University of Miami and studying theater, in fact.
Oh, wow.
And I ended up transferring, realizing that later on, that wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, although I had fun. I did do some paid work as an actor, like in improv troops and community theater, like extras in movies and silly things like that. But
Nice.
I didn't feel like it was fulfilling enough intellectually, so I ended up kind of changing paths. But ironically, I kind of still use those skills today, so they weren't wasted.
Yeah. And then how did you make that transition into thinking? I know you said you wanted more kind of challenge intellectually. Did you have kind of a long process of figuring out where to go next, or did you find it pretty suddenly?
Well, due to some family situations, I was kind of forced to transfer to be closer to my dad at the time. So I didn't have that many choices in terms of colleges to go to when I did that. And then when I was looking at programs in the different colleges around us, I was debating between Stony Brook for fine art because I remember I still wanted art, or I ended up going to Farmingdale and doing visual communications. And that appealed to me because I was thinking with the acting, when I was in Miami, I started taking a lot of communications courses. I was a dual major, communications and theater, and I really loved my advertising classes. And I said to myself, I felt like I could write well, and I knew I had like the public speaking skills, but I wanted to hone my technology skills. So I picked a program where I could do that and really dive deep into like the Adobe programs and all of that. So I ended up kind of shifting into graphic design and art direction and advertising, in which I still do work today in some ways, and in others I do other things too.
Yeah, those are definitely skills that are relevant, I think, to almost any career nowadays. I feel like you have to use some form of Adobe or
Yeah.
visual communication in general. And so what, can you walk me through, I don't think I've ever heard of visual communication as a major. What type of things do you learn in that major?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of like going to art school, but it's in the lens of it's like for commercial use. So it's
Okay.
like you will take the traditional art classes, so the drawing, the painting, the photography, your first year, but then you end up taking, you apply some of the theoretical and the foundational skills that you have from those courses like art history and things like that, graphic design history, and then you apply them by using the programs and developing like portfolio pieces. So it was a very career-centered program. I actually gained career skills even while I was there. I applied for a very competitive internship in Manhattan, and I ended up working on some really big Fortune 500 accounts at a pretty young age due to that. So, and I do accredit it because of the program itself was very, it had a good bridge between what you were learning in school and like what was out there in the corporate world. And not all colleges had that. So that was the benefit.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And then can you walk me through the transition to that job? Did you get that job while you were still in school, or did you take that one right
Yeah.
out of school?
So I did some work in Manhattan, just like freelancing. I did some work kind of like around the area I lived in. I ended up getting my first full-time job, though, was at a publishing company as an art director. And that's how I met my husband. So my husband's dad was my boss. And I had a great relationship with him. But so I liked that atmosphere, working in like an intellectual atmosphere where you were producing news stories and it had deadlines, and I was like laying out 4 weekly newspapers a week. So I learned a lot about just being efficient, and really working with the programs, Adobe, Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, things like that. So it was on the job type of training. And I stayed there for a little bit before, when my husband and I decided to get married, we moved to Colorado. And I got a job like in 9 days of moving there at another publishing company. And I continued to work in newspaper and publishing for, I guess, the next few years, or 2 or 3 years, until I decided to get my MFA, which in my field is a terminal degree. So I did that because I was thinking of starting a family, and the advertising publishing world was a little sometimes challenging just in terms of family life balance.
Hmm.
And I thought, if maybe I could do the teaching. I thought I could find a full-time tenure track line when I graduated, which we all, I'm sure you heard that from so many academics, didn't exactly turn out. But
Yeah.
I kind of went and got my degree thinking that would help make that dream come true. So I guess it was aiming to try to find a position as a professor in the my MFA was in advertising, so I was hoping to work in advertising or visual communications, kind of stay within that arena.
And you said that that didn't work out for you. So what happened when you finished the MFA then?
So when I finished my MFA, the week after, actually, like around the time I was finishing, I moved back to New York because we had two tiny ones really close together in age, and we wanted to be by family. So we spent 5 years in Colorado. We came back to New York so that we could be around family and have that support, because I knew I wanted to work and I just couldn't imagine myself with two babies in daycare and trying to just make it all work at the time,
Yeah.
because I was young. I was in my 20s. So I like went back to New York. When I finished my MFA, the week after I finished, I walked into the department head's office at the local community college with my resume in hand and literally handed it to her. And she hired me on the spot, but as an
Wow.
adjunct.
Yeah.
But kind of dangled the carrot. Hey, in 5 years or so, I'm going to retire. There'll be a full-time job opening, da, da, da. Just, do this for now. I guess I didn't research the life of an adjunct before I accepted, but I did. I do not regret that time teaching there. I loved it. I learned so much, and it really spurred a love of education, which I still do teach to this day, adjunct on the side, because it is a passion, and it just didn't turn out to be like a full-time career like I had originally wanted.
Right. And so once you were adjuncting, was that all you were doing? Or I know a lot of adjuncts tend to do other things at the same time.
Yeah, because they're notoriously not paid well. So you have to kind of compile lots of things to make a normal salary. So I started teaching at Suffolk County Community College. Then I started teaching at American Intercontinental University online, which I do still teach for. And I started teaching for Long Island University, St. Joseph's College. At one
Wow.
time, I was teaching 6 courses at 3 or 4 different universities.
Oh, wow.
Concurrently, I opened my own business all around the same time, 2012, while having 2 kids
Yeah,
close together, like
that's quite an
chaos.
amazing feat.
So I opened my own graphic design firm in 2012 with another woman who is also a graphic designer. So which I started off as like a very part-time thing while I also did the teaching, but it has since then become more of a primary focus where the teaching is taking a back burner.
Okay, and how did you decide to start your own business during that time? I mean, you had two little kids, you were teaching so many classes. What went into
Yeah,
that process? Were you scared?
I, no, you know why? Because I felt like, I think at the time, I know this sounds crazy, but my frame of mind was kind of like investing in stocks, like where if you're diversified, you have less risk. So if I were to, like, if I had a department head at one school tell me, oh, enrollment's down, you don't have a course, I still had another school, or I still had the business to fall back on. So it gave me kind of like a heightened sense of security, which you would think would be the opposite.
Right.
Of course, I wanted the stability, and I think that my husband didn't really appreciate the instability of my paychecks and not knowing what they were and when they were coming.
Yeah.
But because I had the different components, it made me feel a little bit more comfortable about starting a business, because I knew it wasn't my only income. But I started it because I was also still like freelancing on occasion and going into the city, like doing like Madison Ave ad agency stuff, which was really tough. And I knew I didn't want to keep doing that because of the location of where I live. I'm out on the east end of Long Island. So we're talking like a 2.5 hour trip between driving a half hour to the train and like a 2 hour-ish train ride, getting off subway. It's just, as much
Yeah.
as it's exciting and the portfolio and the work is good and paid well, it was like I was just away from the family too much. But I met my partner, my business partner, who was doing the same thing, but she was doing it full time. And there would be times where she would have to stay in the office even overnight and get car service to take her home. Like
Wow.
she worked for like Gray Advertising, like Lowe, some really big pharmaceutical ad agencies. And it was really demanding. And she was always in the city. And she had 2 kids too. So when we chatted, it was like, hey, we both have these really great portfolios and these really good skills, and our personalities jived, and kind of like what she lacked I had, and vice versa. Like I'm a big
Nice.
picture visionary person, and I do like the pitching. She's a very detailed oriented production person, like manages a lot of like little nuancy things with the client. So we ended up just like luckily finding each other, and we have been together ever since.
Nice. And then what types of things did you have to do to start a business? Was that
Yeah, I mean, you have to pick a name, which I don't know if we picked the right one. We advise people on branding, which is so funny. Like, not only are we a graphic design agency, but we do like branding and like corporate identity, help them with mission, vision, values, all of that, right? And it's like, but to do that for ourselves was so challenging. So we called ourselves East End Advertising, but now since we've added instructional design to our capabilities within the last year, now we say East End Advertising, graphic and instructional design. But like in retrospect, we probably should have picked a different name, but it was so hard to pick. So picking a name was a big one. Finding the domain, deciding what kind of entity you wanted to be. If you wanted to be an LLC, a C Corp, an S Corp, speaking to a lawyer, getting an accountant, figuring out like how you're going to manage your invoices. We wear a lot of hats, obviously.
yeah, that
We
sounds like a lot.
in the end decided to do an S corp because the nature of our business lends itself to being you might get sued pretty easily because we work with intellectual property, and so we just didn't want to get in a situation where they would come after our personal belongings. So our lawyer advised us to do an S corp just to give a layer of protection. So that was like kind of what we did for that. But yeah, so it was good. I like I said, like the business was slow at first, but then after a while, it really started picking up because we made a name for ourselves. It has a lot of brand equity in our specific geographic region, and we would constantly get referrals. So we would do work, they'd be happy, and next thing we know, they would refer us to something else. And that's kind of the way it's been. We haven't had to do a lot of hustling, which is nice.
Nice. And then you said this has now become kind of your primary career and you kind of still adjunct on the side. Is that?
Yeah, I still adjunct at AIU because it's online. So it's easier and more flexible for me to fit it into my life.
Mhm.
And then I also work for Harvard University part-time as a learning designer. So I'm still doing multiple things, three things.
And how'd you get into like learning design, instructional design
Oh yeah,
work?
so I guess I left off the part of that I went and got my doctorate. That was
Yeah,
a
that's
whole
a big
bunch
one.
of years of my life I just skipped right over. Um, I got that. I just finished it in March, but that part of the reason why did I do that? I did the program that I got my doctorate in was like part like change management. It's a management degree, so it's not like a PhD, but it's called a practitioner degree. So I
Okay.
knew it would help me in the corporate world, but it would also give me the credentials. So again, if I wanted to teach full time, and I also knew that I wanted to research, write, and publish, and I wanted to have the respects and ability to do those things. So I got my doctorate partly for that, and because this program not only was it the change management piece, but it was mostly like instructional design, curriculum development, learning theory, and all of that, which I became very passionate about as a online professor, and like merging how graphic design and pedagogy and curriculum design kind of like all merged together. So like I learned about instructional design, and I guess it just became like a passion. And even my dissertation was very ID focused. So I like it.
And so I think for a lot of the young listeners out here, I think when we say we're going to start a business, you know, you said you started it in 2012. I think a lot of times the idea is that that's it. That's your career now. I've started a business. I'm making money. It's obviously, you said it was successful. And then you said you just finished your PhD this March. So that's obviously quite a time lapse between starting it and kind of starting your PhD. What decisions went into kind of still branching out and still doing different things and not having that business that you own maybe be that sole provider of your career and your income?
I think it's because I've always been very much immersed in like the corporate world. So although I consider myself like my definition of who I am or my identity is as an academic, it's a scholar practitioner. So like I'm very in touch with the corporate world and like the need for reskilling and upskilling and constantly assessing and reassessing my own strengths and weaknesses. So I think the pivots just like come naturally by like what the demand of the economy is like. So for example, graphic design, and I was just chatting with a graphic designer giving her advice on breaking into ID because she has the same background. Graphic design used to be a business or not a business, but a career that was more lucrative overall. But now with the development of tools like Canva and free open source stuff that people can make their own things, and outsourcing, crowdsourcing, things like Fiverr and all of that, people can produce graphic design for very inexpensive. So it doesn't, it's just not, I knew that I had to make a change partly for that reason too, because I can see the industry like changing ahead of time in a way, you know, like I saw kind of what was happening.
Yeah, that's a good skill to have. Awesome. And so now what are your plans going into the future? Or
Yeah,
do you know what your plans are yet?
I know you'd think that I would. I mean, I do want to continue my path in learning design. I would like to dive in a little bit deeper with understanding neuroscience, like AI, VR, like those I think are going to be the kind of hot areas of the future. They already are, but I'm thinking of trying to improve my skill sets in those specific areas, like while continuing to have my business and maybe just, you know, learn more capabilities and kind of build it out. I think one of my main goals is trying to figure out how to expand our business because it's been growing and it's getting busier and busier, yet we have to start actively like hiring or figuring out how to make money with not, if you don't have so many hours in the day, right? So like one of the things I've developed recently is creating my own courses. So it'll develop a line of passive income so I could still provide the service and this value. They're graphic design courses for the instructional designer, because a lot of instructional designers come from backgrounds like education or history or whatever, a variety, not always graphic design. So they come into the industry without those skills sometimes. So I'm like developing courses specifically to fill that niche, and there's a big niche for that. So I'm hoping that will help me kind of just build income and just go a little bit of a different direction, but still stay within what I'm doing, if that answers your question.
Yes, it absolutely does. And then just to summarize at the very end, I usually like to ask if you have general advice for somebody starting out in kind of any of your careers, because you do a lot of different things, or maybe just in general. What's your biggest piece of kind of career advice that you would give someone?
I guess I woid say that if you're young or you're still in undergrad or grad school and you're listening to this and you're like a little worried about the future or where you're going to go, I guess what I would say is try to enjoy the journey, but like document it along the way, like an archival process. So what I've done with like every job that I've done or every skill that I've had is like kept track of it. So for example, like when I was doing acting and I was taking theater classes, even though now I'm not an actor, I think to myself, like now when I put on my resume, I have public speaking skills and this is how I demonstrated that. I've done this keynote, I've done this presentation, I provided the voiceover talent for this animation. And like, so by documenting all the things that you're learning, even if you change your path, you're still building. So those blocks are building. You're not completely taking a total U-turn, even though it feels like you are. You're just like becoming a newer, better version of you. And as you go along, you'll find your path with those tools. It's kind of like existentialism, right? Like we're the sum of our journey and our experiences, and just kind of like enjoy the journey. Don't worry so much about where you're ending up.
I really like that. I also really like the idea of documenting it all as someone who's currently doing my third year review where I have to document everything I've done the past 3 years.
Yes.
Having if I had done that along the way, it would make this time a little easier. And so that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, totally.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you for listening to the Career Journey Podcast. Head over to our website at careerjourneypodcast.com for more information and the latest episodes. See you next time.